Utopian Cartography. I'm Neonn Felicity, and today I just wanted to talk about democracy and whether it's still relevant, or whether it's what we want to be fighting for right now. Or because the chapter I'm writing, I went into it trying to explain the ways that our current representative system isn't actually democratic, and it's actually just the aristocracy pretending to let us participate so that we feel invested in the system, even though we don't actually have any say over the decisions that get made. But in this research, I've been realizing that there's people right now that are actually advocating against democracy. What I've been realizing lately, so that, there's an anarchist slogan: the center will not hold, or the center cannot hold. And I think that's definitely true right now. The neoliberal paradigm is collapsing, and so people are running to the edges, and so everybody on mainstream media who is they're all centrists, corporatists, they're all talking about the dangers of the far left and the far right as if they're the same thing. And it's been making me realize that it seems like the main thing that we can agree on the right and the left is anti-authoritarianism. Like, I've noticed since the election that Cenk has made a habit of caricaturing people on the right as being beta males and cucks, and doing the caricaturing conservatives as being inherently authoritarian by nature, and wanting to fall behind a charismatic demagogue like Trump. But one thing that I've noticed in my conversations with conservatives is that their primary concern is the anti-authoritarian concern. Like, the get out of my life part does seem to be the most important part of their general idea. And so I think a lot of the confusion, I think a lot of the problems in our political discourse right now is that we're talking past each other, and either side doesn't believe what the other side says. And it's totally valid, because both sides are lying a lot of the times, because our political discourse is set up to make us not want to participate in politics. It's set up to make we citizens relinquish our powers, even though we have unprecedented opportunities right now, even though we have all these emerging platforms that are enabling new ways of participation, new ways of actually understanding what the people want, in ways that just weren't possible before. The Western system, the whole notion of liberal democracy that was, the brainchild of the Enlightenment, it was fundamentally an innovation in that it put a little bit of power into the hands of the people where there was none at all before. And, democracy always comes up against the same criticisms. Like, Plato was critical of democracy because the citizens of Athens killed Socrates by democratic vote. And so he was like, oh, okay, so if the people, the ignorant masses, can elect to execute the ideal of a philosopher king in Socrates, then there must be something wrong with the people writ large that makes them not worthy of real decision making, because they would carry out something like that. And people have made that argument against democracy all along, and even during the founding, I've been doing a bunch of research about the debates that were going on during the founding, and I've heard people extol the virtues of the founding fathers limiting the scope of the democratic power of the new government that they were designing by saying the vulgar masses shouldn't be involved in the decision making process because they're just not capable. But that argument is the same as when people say, like, for example, that democracy isn't possible in places like the Arab world because, oh, hey, they'll just elect, fundamentalists of their own culture, So I think a lot of the heat that is generated in our political debates is fundamentally based on misconceptualizing what the other side of the ideological spectrum wants. And I think a lot of the confusion is about what democracy is and whether we have it or not, because I think that a lot of the problems that are attributed to the system that we have now are generally lopped on to democracy in general, like as if the political process that we have right now is equals democracy, and that like the agonistic gridlock in Congress that we know now that is democracy. And so there is real good reason to have lost faith in that system to, make rational, good decisions about what to do about anything. But the most important thing to understand is that this political process that we're laboring under is 200 years old. Like, people really need to wrap their minds around the fact that we're doing politics based on a model where the fucking telephone hadn't even been invented yet. I saw recently the first transatlantic telegraph was in 1858. So we didn't even have the communication technology for people to communicate with the policymakers. See, there I go again. See, all of our discussions about democracy and the nature of government, the role of government, and all of that, like, it's all occurring within the old paradigm of what of a couple hundred years ago was possible. Like, we talk about the political process becoming corrupted by big money in our elections, since 78 or since Citizens United. But the whole entire government was designed for business interests. They were the only people involved at the discussion. Like, they were philosophical in nature, but they were businessmen, and they were negotiating business contracts, about how to divvy up this, how they're going to manage this new vast territory that they just slaughtered all the natives on and kidnapped some people forced to labor. The whole situation in which these men hatched and designed this democratic republic without really any communication technology. The whole entire point of an administrative bureaucracy, Steve Bannon talks about dismantling the administrative state. So what is that? What is that administrative state? It's the series of institutions that have been built up around this couple 100-year-old constitution. It's interesting because, even though obviously Steve Bannon is a fascist, he does have a somewhat proper Leninist revolutionary conception of the dismantling of these old power structures. I mean, obviously he would take it in a different direction than he would likely replace those old pseudo-democratic power structures and institutions with overtly, he calls himself an ethno-nationalist. Fucking despicable. But anyways, and I think honestly the most frustrating misconception that people have about Marx is that he was an authoritarian. Like, Marx wasn't staunchly anti-authoritarian. Marx was an anarchist. Like, he hated authority, and the whole conception of the proletarian uprising is him understanding the frustration of the exploited and alienated laborer and saying, we are going to rise up. And I guess just because of the way that power-hungry authoritarian men have twisted and abused and perverted the ideas of that uprising. In the Zeitgeist movement, when we talk about a resource-based economy and a radically open and radically democratized economic system that beyond our wildest dreams, and people go from accusing it of being this authoritarian, Soviet Stalinist central planning scheme to then attacking it for being the tyranny of the majority and for obviously we need there needs to be some structure. So which one is it? Like, are we too democratic, or are we not democratic enough? Is it too authoritarian, or is it not authoritarian enough? And I've noticed that people make this switch from first saying, hey, I want to be able to make my own decisions and not have a central planner make decisions for me, and then the next moment turn around and say, oh, well, other people can't make decisions for themselves. They need a system that will basically coerce them to do the right thing. Because people won't do it on their own. Another a big part of it is based on original sin, like the notion that we're evil, and it's a Christian notion that was originally devised in order to justify the Roman Empire, or empire in general, just because the people aren't sufficient on their own, and therefore they have to submit to a power structure. But then there's the whole libertarian tradition that arose out of the revolt against that fascist church, which was, telling everybody that they're going to go to hell if they don't do such and such. I guess the point I'm trying to get at in this video is just that democracy is becoming possible in ways that it never was before, and so that totally relivens the debate about democracy itself. So it's like, now that democracy is really possible, we have to decide whether it's what we want. So we've been, pretending to have democracy and extolling the virtues of democracy for a couple hundred years, but not had to really take it seriously because the population couldn't talk back. But in the past few decades, in the past couple decades, really only a decade, the population is really, really, really talking back, really loudly. So yeah, progressives in this country need to figure out what it is that they're really advocating for. And if we make it clear that the whole entire point of democracy is power to the people, and that's not different than the libertarian project at all. It's just a matter of applying these new tools these new digital tools that we have to actually get the voices of the people implemented. Like our whole system is just so corrupt that, the desires of the population mean nothing to the decision makers. All they care about is their donors. That's a feature of the way that the whole entire system was set up from the beginning. And it's just falling apart now, and the reason that it gets so much attention is because of how much possibility there is out there now. Like, I was watching a TED Talk this morning that this guy made a great point that we vote every day. Like, our primary mode of interaction with the internet is voting. We like and reshare and post things, and those are votes. Like, that can all be in the same way that Google works, indexing and coming to conclusions about the Rousseauian general will. Like, we actually do know how. We actually do have tools now to assess the general will, and like that can be done in ways that just simply wasn't possible before. Like, when you study philosophy, like mostly talking political philosophy, it's mostly exchanges between thinkers that were literally all living hundreds of years ago. And so, it's not like they were any more virtuous or wise than us. Like, they had slaves. There's like, why are we taking our civic advice from these people who literally decided that it was worth it to just massacre people that were living on this land and take it over, and then set up shop and called it the land of the free and the home of the brave. that whole system, everything about politics, that all the policy wonks to jerk each other off about, like, that's all the paper-based matrix of hundreds of years ago. Like, with technologies like the blockchain that makes transactions all on a single publicly available ledger, and so everybody can count the votes. Like, we don't have to rely on some company, that runs a voting machine, to have made it secure enough to be safe from hacking by whatever. Like, after the last election, Debbie was always making the point that the only reason that Hillary lost was because the Trump people were able to overcome the margin of cheating. So, like, they had rigged the system. It's so many, they could only rig it so far, but then it's like, I don't want to get into the last election. Damn it. That's not what this video is about at all. What I've been wrestling with lately is the notion of the democratic impulse, and the way that Huey Newton said the society itself. I forget how he phrased it, but it said something like the society itself struggles to fight against colonialism, and because he had started the interview with William Buckley saying, if you had been around in 1776, would you have been on the side of the British or on the side of the Americans? And then I thought it was a brilliant way to start off the interview, because it set the tone of like pro-revolution. So I guess the main thing that I would like to argue is that progressives need to figure out what they're arguing for, because I noticed that the Democrats, tend to be, they're like falling all over themselves to defend our old institutions, like with all this shit about the fucking FBI thing, like and there are all these mainstream neoliberal pundits, these Democrats, talking about how dare they accuse the FBI of malfeasance. And I'm like, wait, what? How are we you really expect to get people on your side by defending the FBI? The mainstream left has lost all its credibility because it's defending all these old dead institutions that aren't solving anything. So I guess I just think we need to focus on the aspects of a hyper-democratic future that actually put the decision-making about the things that people call liberty into the hands of the people, and themselves, individually. But like mass decisions about like where to put a power plant, or like what kind of energy to use to produce the power, like those decisions should be made collectively by the whole entire society, not by just a handful of people who happen to literally own the property in a certain spot or whatever. Like the whole entire environmental justice movement is based on the notion that poor people do not have the liberty to live in places without the environmental costs of capitalism. Everybody talks about how the corporations externalize the losses and privatize the gains. I guess I just think that we need to get in our arguments for democracy and what it can do, like really get back to focusing on the emancipatory nature of it. Like that, it'll enable us to throw off the yoke of a. I had to look that up at one point. But the yoke was like that big apparatus that they would attach to a bull or a beast of burden, to get them to tow the field or whatever, that have slaves or whatever, peasants or serfs or whoever the fuck they were making work the fields at that time in human history, would like actually have to carry this big ass, they have to walk the field, tilling the field, like carrying this thing, this big like apparatus that like dug through the ground to like whatever. Shows how much I know about agriculture. At least old school, anachronistic, industrial agriculture practices. Bronze Age shit. But anyways, the metaphor still holds. Didn't Jesus say, throw off your yoke? Whatever, like, so the Savior is like, oh yeah, I'll do your work for you. That's what the machines and this new wave of automation that is like taking the bulk of the jobs off of our back, like this technology that's coming to help take off that yoke or whatever of the labor that we had to give in to the economy. Like the machines are like, oh yeah, just throw off your yoke, like take a load off, go fucking philosophize, do some art, and learn some shit, and we'll take care of the productive thing. Like, I guess I got a potential there, but I guess I just really think that people need to open their mind about the possibilities of applying this disintermediation that is occurring in the economy to the political system and to the actual substantive decisions. And a professor that's my favorite professor actually, economics is who decides who gets what, and politics is who decides who gets what. So he was very clear about how those are two different sets of decisions. Anyways, sorry, I gotta wrap up this video. Sorry, I'm trying to get back to writing this chapter about democracy that I'm writing, but I guess I just wanted to put this video together to, raise the question about what is this thing called democracy that we're defending, and I guess my next video will be a defense of it. And this is just raising the question. But anyways, thanks for watching. I'm Neonn Felicity, and this has been Utopian Cartography, the video series to illuminate our path out of this neoliberal leviathan. Let me know what you think about democracy in the comments.